Hey guys, my name is Ruben Dante, and as you guys know, I am running for Congress for Texas 14, and I am a big supporter of the right to bear arms. In fact, I have incessantly said much of the same, which is the right of the people to defend themselves from their from enemies, foreign and domestic. And so, I don't want to go off of my opinion. I just want to go ahead and read something from, for example, in this case, also from Texas, gooden.house.gov, which is the Second Amendment guarantees the citizens the right to keep and bear arms. History is littered with examples of governments whose sides towards authoritarianism begin with the disarmament of the people. Our gun, our right to gun ownership ensures that we can defend freedoms from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so the same with Alexander Hamilton to the point where he implied that people should be armed to the same degree of the government, again, to protect themselves from enemies, foreign and domestic. And a lot of this, if not most of it, is in context to big government, not to, like Matt Gaetz said, not to hunting, not to anything of that nature. With that said, I have spoke on this extensively that from a more practical perspective, peace through strength starts with individual strength, meaning the personal empowerment of being able to bear arms, even to the degree in which the government is weaponed with, right? So to the same caliber of arming ourselves, and in our pursuit of life, liberty, excuse me, in our endeavor of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is applicable that individually you defend that right, and then as a collectively we defend that which we value. So I have I have tweeted a ton about our duty as it pertains to overthrowing of government and what have you. So I also feel the responsibility of clarifying what that means to me, at least, as I don't know everyone else's intentions, but when I said the right to bear arms or even implying overthrowing government, I do not mean, I never have meant, and I don't believe that the Constitution means hurting or assaulting government officials. It simply means that when you are equally empowered, you have the power to kind of freeze, right? To kind of everyone hold, let's do the constitutional rights or look at the constitutional rights we have to recount the votes. We won't be silent. So it's not this idea, at least not to me, of going out there and hurting government officials or attacking them or killing army men or anything like that, or no matter what side of the aisle. It simply means that you're equally defended, and as being equally defended, the government cannot stop you, cannot kill you, cannot control you. The individual, again, implying that also Americans understand the deep esoterica that is involved with this country. And when we think about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's in America first. And I know there's an argument for America first, or rather, the political interpretation of non-interventionalism. But before that, when the Constitution was written, when we think about all men are created equal in the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or um, limited government and its equation to free will, it implies that the citizens of the country understand that America first means all Americans, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Muslim, gay, straight, trans, or what have you. And by first, it means that you're putting the idea of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all men being created equal, and that we have more in common than we do different. And that no matter what God you believe in, we all come from the same one, and putting that oneness ahead of divisiveness and the illusion of separation, because inevitably, because America is not tens of thousands of years old with a rich culture, the most existential threat to that would inevitably be to divert and fall into cultural division or stoke the flames of racism, because inevitably, if we do not address, for example, like I said in my previous video, the velocity of the dollar and the way it's being spent in, for example, Mexican American culture, it tends to go longer further, whether it is to other countries or within our own community. Same with it, the different Asian American cultures, Japanese American, Chinese Americans, keeping the money within their own culture, as well as Judaism and what have you. And you can understand why people would resonate further with their own culture. But inevitably, if that continues to be the case, meanwhile, we do not put the America idealism of the oneness above and beyond that cultural separation and division, not necessarily to negate or to end that idea, or to kind of denounce your roots. Simply putting that oneness ahead of the divisiveness inevitably would lead to American integration. So it implies that people kind of understand that, and it implies that we have a solid foundation of again, God. No matter which one you believe in, we come from the same one. And America really depicts that as that beacon of light and hope in the very um the Pledge of Allegiance, and the very idealism of the Constitution. And so when one properly understands that, which is why it's so important to understand all of it in its proper context and the implications of it all, because again, the way to end discrimination is to understand that no matter what God you believe in, we all come from the same one, and everything and everyone is a fragmentation of that same source. Just like if you break a mirror, you can see yourself in all the different glass pieces, but you see yourself whole in each individual piece. We are that same source rediscovering itself through our human experience by the divine mirror that everyone else is expressing in that remembrance. And so when you understand it that way, and then the uniqueness of that second, right, whether it's your unique archetypal creativity, imagination, your god-given potential in its light, second, the hurt people, and the wounds and the archetypal wounds people experience, third, and then finally the chemical composition of the body that makes up the essence of that person, or the essence of that universal source rediscovering itself, last, meaning race, religion, gender, the cells that composite that essence is the last thing you realize. And then thus there is no even conversation of discrimination. With that being absent, the way people defend their individual rights or the collective defense, with the most incredible truths with which this country is rooted in, that universal law of oneness, also comes the most dangerous lies, which is why I think it's so important to clarify upon those principles of honoring your neighbor as you do yourself, and understanding that those you don't agree with are inevitably a part of you, showing itself uh, to you through a different lens, through a different mirror, and that there is no separation. Upon understanding that, you will naturally respect people's sovereign life and people's rights, and you wouldn't just aim to kill people. When you think about the context of the Second Amendment, and your right to defend yourselves, and again, individually, and thus then collectively, in the collective values of American oneness, you would go, for example, because I've said this a ton, especially as it pertains to January, one, that is not an insurrection, and not in the definition of, if you go open a new tab and Google insurrection, but rather in the context of the Constitution, when it says it is the people's duty to overthrow the government. It's talking to the violation of, for not upholding the Constitution. It's talking to the end of that sentence ends with the same in context to a specific Constitution. The Constitution within of itself is not government officials, is not the Capitol building. It's the Constitution, right? So that's primarily why it's defending, or in what is defending, and why I am such a big defendant of Edward Snowden, because he honored his pledge to the Constitution, not to a government agency. Again, going back to the very fundamental nature of the right to bear arms, because when you can empower yourself to the equal and same degree in which government ruling over you can, then you do not succumb to the will of man or subvert God or source or universe, whatever that means to you, that whatever powers you, that powers you all. You do not subvert that for another human being. You do not succumb to communism, because you will not bow to false idols or to another man, right? So when you are equally empowered, that conversation can really not even be started. And with that equal empowerment, when you are, in this case, as it pertains to January 6th, right? Because, I've said it a ton, even the Ascended Masters, Jesus, Moses, the whole thing with the cleansing of the temple, which again was so, when he knew that was going to kill him, same with the Moses and what happened to Egypt. It's not about killing them. It's simply about the personal empowerment that it implies to be able to stand up to tyrannical men. And so when I reference that in context of January 6th, it was about the fact that when Josh Hawley, who I really love, and even Donald Trump, who did not incite. If he incited the insurrection, then Maxine Waters and all these other people. And again, my intention is not to polarize; it's simply to go by the statement of fact. Because if you go by ideological narratives and all of the stretching and reaching, then who is the judge, jury, and arbiter of what is and is not acceptable, right? So if you just take their actions without projecting your fierce ideology and your own discrimination onto it and your own fragmentation within yourself onto that world, you can see that he did not incite the insurrection. He did not. He called for a peaceful protest over and over and over again. Maybe if there was a group of people that facilitated people that wanted to be there, again, that's facilitating people to mobilize in your favor. I don't necessarily see what's wrong with that. It's not a call for violence. It is a call to bring in a standstill, to freeze everything as everyone is equally empowered, right? It's like the whole thing with even having a human body in the first place, like having this chemical body. So in that sense, if whenever everyone, and this was the most egregious thing of it all, whenever everyone in Congress, after that thing happened with however you want to name it, whatever happened on January 6th, everyone called on Hawley and Ted Cruz and villainous and crucified them, wrongfully so, for expressing their constitutional right to express their objection to the votes in the constitutional manner, and what it is about the concerns that they have that, by the way, have not been addressed. They have not been addressed. Just like the Wuhan lab theory, we haven't been able to have that conversation. So the technicalities, and I can even cite mainstream media. I think on my Twitter I cited the Tampa. I think that a mainstream news source that basically said, well, it's great because even if the voting mishaps that happened in Pennsylvania would not be up to the Supreme Court or to Congress, it would have been. So yes, we can say that it was a gray area. You can even go as far as to say that it's a 99.9%, which is untrue. But you can go on so far as to say like it's unlikely that it was that laws were changed to the degree by which it would have changed the election, which I do believe. If you went by all of the sovereign votes, I believe it would have been a different outcome. And you can just look at the math and the margin of error. I believe it's 40,000 by what he lost by. The margin of error of questionable election changes exceeds that, right? So it's not about, I don't even understand why people even call it the big lie. If anything, you can call it the big uncertainty, but we know that the things that fall within the gray area of what happened exceed the margin of error, right? So the right to have that investigated and have answers to that was what never came to be, right? And he was crucified, and people were like, even, and this upset me so much, the Georgia representative that was like, oh, because of what happened, I now do not want to contest the election. There is no correlation between what happened on January 6th and whether there was or was not election fraud. There is just no correlation, like plain and simple. Whether or not they came into the Capitol and the percentage of people that may have come into the Capitol in contrast to the people that were there, again, without going into how unfair it is of what happened last year, it was mostly peaceful. If you go by the margin of people that actually got in and the margin of the people that showed up. But the fact that they try to then justify, and this is why people from a deep rooted, energetic level feel the way they feel about January, because even if they cannot put it into words or quantify what happened, they know that something was off, right? And in that, there is that very embodiment of that depiction. There is no reason why people said you must stop your constitutional right to contest, as your constituents would want you to do, in the embodiment of that democracy, honoring the will of your constituents. And now we are going to crucify you for expressing that constitutional right, for going by the will of your constituents, and we will antagonize you based on uncorrelated events, right? That's the first problem with that narrative. The second, And so with the right to bear arms, theoretically, what would have happened is, no, you cannot stop his constitutional right to what he is expressing. We are all going to present ourselves in a standstill and have this thorough conversation about the events that are in question, not about overthrowing the election, not about tossing the election, not about unrooting Joe Biden or antagonizing Pelosi. No, simply there's questions that are not being answered. You are refusing to subvert us from getting that answer. We believe you're violating the Constitution or the constitutionality or the sovereignty of this country in doing so. So here we are today to freeze what is happening and allow this conversation to proceed. Theoretically speaking, from a universal first principle standpoint, that is what the right to bear arms means. And I also want to, not that it's anybody's particular business. I've never held a gun. I don't own a gun. I never want to own a gun. It's a right that I respect in others that I don't necessarily want for myself. I might hire security if I get elected or whatever. I don't care for guns. I don't like them, but I understand the context in which people are expressing this ideology. And the other thing that I want to address, that I keep hearing all of this, and the reason I'm addressing this is because as I listen to these Democratic officials, and political pundits and all of them, it does sound like they're actually well intended, and it sounds like they're in good faith, believe what they say. And that was my biggest question. It's like, do these people actually believe what they're saying, or are they willfully blind, or are they willfully selling this propaganda to the masses? So I want to address the most controversial points in this whole discourse. The second one I want to address is the I guess in regards to Matt Gaetz, how people are saying free the children, or how that was a big thing, right? Like save the children. I do believe in save the children. That's why I also jacked with my side of the aisle as to the events that are happening in Gaza, but that's a different video. But in that sense, when you talk about that ideology, when you talk about that, he has not been convicted, right? So if we believe in so a lot of people want to say a lot of Republicans are just hypocrites and what have you. Like I want to help you guys. It's Anubis. I want to help you guys understand why I agree and I see the things the way I do, and it's not hypocritical at all. We also believe that you are innocent until proven guilty, while simultaneously we're seeing the media really get away with all kinds of, the censorship, right? So like the big Wuhan lie, we're seeing that be allowed. So it's understandable why anybody would question the narrative with Matt Gaetz, and whether and to what degree that may be true. So that's just innocence proven guilty, which I don't believe is hypocritical to believe in that and saving the children. Now, what's happening other places, and I understand. So the second one I want to address is the whole thing with like Liz Cheney, where people are like, oh, these people really were Republicans or conservatives, they wouldn't agree with what happened to her. That is absolutely incorrect. She does not represent the will of her constituents, and willfully so, right? So it is exactly the democratic thing to do to, one, allow her to remain in her position, and two, remove her from the leadership position because she is subverting the will of her constituents. Like, that's not confusing. That's not confusing. That's not hypocritical. That's not anti-conservative. That's not anti-Republican. In fact, it is the very embodiment of democracy to say, hey, you're deviating from the will of the constituents that you should be bound by, in my opinion. In my opinion, our elected officials should be bound by the will of of their constituents, right? And so we will allow you to remain in your chair. Now it would be undemocratic and anti-American to remove her from her elected chair per se, without calling some sort of voting. But she just didn't represent that. So it is exactly a democratic thing to do to remove her. If I fundamentally agree with something that my constituents wanted me to keep stoking or to vote for, I am of the belief that if my constituents want to investigate the viscosity of Jello, it is my role to at least advocate for some equivalency of what we pay in taxes in this district to vote for that. So if I was elected in my body, my constituents fundamentally felt that something should be done that I fundamentally disagree with and couldn't do it with faith, I would recuse myself. I would be like, you know what, guys, this thing you want, I don't see it. I don't agree with it. I cannot represent that in good faith. I recuse myself. Let whoever else take over, right? So the question here is and really the reality is the enormous amount of narcissism in terms of at least actions that this woman is engaging in, right? The fact that she has made an entire party narrative solely about her, with her as the judge, jury, and arbiter of what it means to be Republican when it doesn't resonate with the masses. There is nothing democratic about allowing her to continue that leadership. And the rhetoric that implies this is, again, circles back to the right to bear arms, not to hurt anyone, but to be like, excuse me, ma'am, we need to have a thorough conversation because you seem, as a government entity, in terms of our protection from government and its embodiment in the Second Amendment, ma'am, you are deviating from what we elected you to do. And so we are gathered here today to have an honest, accountable conversation where we are equal in power and we cannot get sprayed down by your local police, by your private bodyguards, by some other government entity. We are equal here and we are gathered here today to sit down and have a conversation. So, with that said, that's really all that I want to go over in this video. I can't think of anything. Um, one last point is, there's this constant narrative on the left that, like, our founding fathers never thought that we would see or have like semi-automatic weapons. Well, one, if you read it, if you just read what they wrote, it's not really relevant because their continued point is we should be armed to the same degree by which the government is to protect and defend ourselves both domestically, all enemies, foreign and domestic. In this case, where, for example, Josh Hawley, and there's a lot of things I don't like about Ted Cruz, but Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz were wrongfully crucified for doing their constitutional duty that their constituents would have wanted them and elected them to do, and forcing them to stop and subverting that is exactly what the amendment is for. Not to hurt nobody, but to be like, excuse me, ma'am, Miss Pelosi, McConnell, whomever, Pence, we need a freeze because you are getting way out of your bounds of your jurisdiction as it pertains to the Constitution. Can we let Josh Hawley finish whatever he is saying and then go from there, right? Can we look into the regulators? That's another thing. Why were the concerns of all of the people that testified in the hearings? Now, I understand that all of the, I was gonna say, well, they weren't like real hearings and what have you, but the reason why it's relevant is like they signed affidavits that are kind of legally binding. Like if they lie, they could be held accountable. Why is that not being heard? And the narrative, and this is the narrative that the left and really the establishment elite, which is why we're all so disgusted with them, is that, well, every judge said, like throughout the ruling, every judge did that, every scholar said this. We don't care. We don't care what the scholars said. We don't care about any of this. Not to subvert democracy, but if you really want to prove to us that there was no election fraud, then investigate the claims that we are concerned about. Air the things that we want to have an honest discourse about. We want to have an honest discourse about the events that some of these women or volunteers experienced in the auditing sessions, or excuse me, in the polling places. We want to investigate these. And like, even if you want to say, oh, well, they're all lies, okay, let's then show us the algorithm, explain to us why it's normal that a voting machine system will have in its manual rulebook how to gamify its tally. Explain to us why that's normal. Show us how maybe all of this is present in all the various social media websites so that like the horrible narrative of gain of function research, right? Like, give us, if you explain to us something of that nature that can expand on our genuine concerns that we are witnessing, that you are suppressing in the news, that you are censoring in the news, then we can have that honest discussion. Again, theoretically speaking, in my view, that's what the Second Amendment would be about. Like, excuse me, CNN, big tech media, or what have you, we are not here to hurt you. We are here equally armed to the police by which you may bring, because these are our concerns and these concerns are not being addressed. Why? And then XYZ, AD, ABCDFG, or what have you. It's really about a balancing of power individually and thus then therefore collectively. So again, that's why, in my opinion, American First is the path of least resistance to end discrimination, because of the oneness principle based on America idealism, which is life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all Americans, all men being created equal, and being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That within of itself is very, it's a very strong depiction of oneness, right? That we have more in common than they do different. Then and thereafter, you can talk about our unique archetypal experience as an LGBT Hispanic male, as a Black woman, as a cis white male, what have you, whatever it is you're after, not to abandon those roots, but simply put the oneness ahead of that. So, with that said, I love you guys. I felt the responsibility to make this video because I have seen a lot of my stuff being quoted directly, indirectly, and kind of taking fire. And in the same respect, as I see the silent majority, because I see the impressions and the views and the expandedness of anything I post, but no likes or comments, and I understand why. But I did feel the responsibility to clarify that stance, because I have been a big advocate of this narrative of personal empowerment, of peace through strength, starting with individual right to bear arms to the equal caliber of that which the government wields and yields, as depicted by Alexander Hamilton. And so, with that, I'll close this video by saying that these things are not zero sum games. So, yes, the guns don't kill people, but again, I believe health is an imminent part of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You cannot have life without health, and principally mental health, right? So I have a whole policy written out about lowering the barrier to entry for spiritual advisors, life coaches, counselors, therapists, or what have you, be able to take a compliance test to service those emotionally distressed, create more jobs, use the same voucher system, and have people be able to express that emotional distress or mental distress anonymously to those who they may feel most comfortable, empowering more job creation, decent paying jobs, fulfilling the need of emotional and mental and spiritual health, while simultaneously lowering the barrier to entry for these great paying jobs of all different sectors, religious leaders or otherwise. So, with that said, I love you guys. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.